All right, we will go ahead and get started. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Hopefully, everyone is adjusting to this change in weather that we are experiencing here in Illinois. We are very excited to bring back Jason Buckles this morning. We had the pleasure of having him at our conference a couple years ago, and I know that he did a webinar back in August, I think it was, for us again. So we're super excited to have him back. As a reminder to everyone, you are muted, your cameras are disabled. I noticed a couple people raising their hand. Any questions, concerns, you can put those into the chat box or the Q&A. I will try my best to monitor that throughout for Jason, and I know that he's going to allow a little bit of time at the end for some questions. As a reminder, after the webinar, within 24 hours, you will receive an email. It'll still come from Amy Burke's email address that has the survey or the slash quiz that you must complete in order to get your continuing education certificates. But be on the lookout, give that about 24 hours. Sometimes we have some technology glitches there, but it will come to the email address that you registered with. That's also a good reminder that if you're using someone else's link, you're not accounted for. So make sure that you hop over onto our website, icpn.org. You can register real quick and hop right back onto the webinar. I believe that's all I have, Jason, if you want to go ahead and get started.
What's up, everybody? This is super exciting seeing hundreds of people pop up on the participant list. As Danielle said, we did the same talk in August, and it was so popular that we're doing it again. And there should be, we're planning on follow-ups to this. So consider this kind of an introduction, kind of big picture stuff. And depending on feedback, depending on questions, we can continue this series because this is an ongoing conversation that's been had in the United States, at least for 150 years, about disability and sexuality. Um, some of you have seen me before. I've done talks for ICPN for a few years now, some webinars, stuff at the conferences. So hello again, and thank you for choosing to listen to me babble for 2 hours again. Um, some of you haven't met me in person or online. So I'm Jason Buckles. I'm a consultant for the New Mexico Department of Health. Currently, that's what I do. And one of my main gigs with New Mexico is running our sexual risk screening program. It's a pretty unique program in the United States that we've built over the last 24 years, roundabout, from nothing to a whole bunch. And that's kind of informing where I'm coming from talking about this. I'm a mental health counselor. That's how I kind of cut my teeth doing inpatient, outpatient substance abuse groups, and then really more working as a direct support professional, which is what I typically go back to in my head as being some of the best work I've done is that day-to-day stuff. I'm really hoping out of this huge group of folks we have in the training today, the talk today, that we've got a bunch of direct support folks who are provided and given and chose to take their time to talk about this because when it comes down to us, all of these questions we're going to pose today come down to the day-to-day work of direct support of family members who are doing family living, as we call it in New Mexico, or folks in supported living or day programs who sit at these boundaries of rights and risk, of decision making in real time, in real situations, not theoretical stuff that goes on in plans and paperwork, but what is happening on the ground and how do we address that? And how do we make decisions about that? So that's the crux of what we're talking about. Um, I certainly do a lot of other stuff with mental health aspects of intellectual disability and university teaching and tons of trainings around the country for different groups. We're going to hit some aspects of dignity of risk today, which is we're going to briefly hit it because really that's another at least 2 hour conversation. But we'll spice things up with some ideas around dignity of risk near the end. But to kick us off, real quick to get it going, let's start to have some conversations here, and let me get that going. So I want you to write down a relationship or sexual decision that you or a friend has made that may have led to extra consequences if done by a person with intellectual or developmental disability. Like basically, what's the worst relationship or sexual decision you've ever made? So we're going to write those down. Maybe we can post them in the chat and we can start to build your sexual support program, with a lot of input from everybody about opinions about your sexuality and your relationship decisions and your most intimate details. So if we do pick that, the group chat, we're going to read some out loud, then we'll start writing up plans as we go along. We'll spend most of the 2 hours doing that about one person's decisions, but we're not going to do that, right? We're not going to do that. Hopefully nobody was writing stuff down. Hopefully somebody might be erasing right now as we are talking like, wait, I don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. And of course you don't have to do that. Probably many of you are like, oh, he's joking. He wouldn't make us do that. Some people might have been like, what? Um, but we do this all the time, right? We don't do it with each other, right? The folks providing support, but we do it to the folks who we are supporting. We ask the most intimate details of their life. We have meetings about it. We invite all kinds of people to said meetings, and we talk about these things as if, that's just normal life. I know in my system, we talk about where um, the waiver that we run is supposed to emulate regular life, right? It's supposed to take down barriers, institutional practices, and emulate regular life. And does it do that? Sure, a lot of the time, but when it gets down to these pretty sticky subjects, sorry, that's probably a bad turn of phrase in this topic. When it comes down to these areas, we kind of lose it, right? And it can become really institutional really quickly, where we're like, that person's business is all of our business, and we're going to talk about this, and everybody gets to have input on their sexual decisions, and everybody gets to play doctor, and everybody gets to have a moralistic opinion, etc. And we're just going to go about it willy-nilly. And it's embarrassing. I know for several folks I've worked with over the years, you know, basically meetings were a source of extreme stress and anxiety for them because it was, let's air all the bad things you've done. Let's talk about all the behavioral problems you've had over the last year and wag our finger at you, and then we're going to come up with plans. It doesn't always happen like that. We've got a lot of great meetings, but when things go south or sideways, it can rapidly devolve into this, where we ask folks we support to be open books about all their most private thoughts, most private actions, which in some ways, yes, we do need to know about, as we'll talk about today, the different aspects of rights, risk, and responsibility with sexuality. But how do we go about doing that? What are more metered ways? What are more dignified ways? What are more predictable pathways that are evidence-based and respectful, et cetera? So if we did that, imagine you're living, always try to take that perspective of what if I had to go to this day program every day? What if I had to live in this house? What if I had to have roommates I was not choosing to have, or live in places I didn't choose to live? And what would that do to my sense of self, of my own concepts of sexuality, my concepts of privacy, or concepts of what is appropriate or inappropriate? All these terms we use a lot, like, oh, having private time, or we need to have that in private. Do the people you support have true privacy? That is a question we'll come back to over the next couple hours, like concepts of privacy. Or do we just sometimes say, well, we check in their room every 15 minutes because fall risk, or because of this, that, the other, so that at any point your bedroom door can be opened? What would that do to your concept of what is your private space? What about sexuality and the ideas of appropriate or inappropriate? How many different messages do we get about sexuality through our media, through what we see happening in our neighborhoods? on TV, on the internet, the wild west of sexuality. Um, and what does appropriate even mean? How do you know what's appropriate and what isn't? How does a direct support professional know to say, well, they told me to stop this person from doing inappropriate things? What do they mean by that? Because it depends, right? What you may say with your buddies or your best friends when you're out for a good time on the town and commenting and making jokes could be considered appropriate in that context. But if you did it right now in this meeting, that's inappropriate. So, same thing, just different place, different people. And how that's a big example, right? When you're out on the town versus in a professional meeting, there's a lot more gray area there. And like that on the title slide, where it was all that swirly black and white, I kind of picked that intentionally because all of these matters of sexuality in our decision making have a ton of gray area. There is no direct, bright line most of the time. Clearly, we could give examples where it's like, yeah, that's not okay. And yes, this is okay. But most of the decision making on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis, minute-to-minute basis with direct support staff in relationship with the people they support is gray area of what am I supposed to do? And explaining those subtleties and how that changes over time is super difficult. And if you were living in a system where these types of questions were asked, what's the worst thing you've ever done sexually? What's the worst relationship decision you've ever made? And now that goes in your chart and it becomes part of your history, legitimately so. I'm not saying we should not be charting concerns, but it takes on a life of its own for the folks who receive supports, where that becomes sometimes who they are. A single decision, a single set of decisions, maybe that happened 10, 12 years ago, that now define the person, that now become part of how they are spoken about. Um, so, what are we doing here today? What are the objectives of this? Because it can get all off into so many different subsets of topics here, which I'm down to do in ongoing talks about this. Whatever topics anybody wants to tackle, I think we can find a way or find somebody to do that. But today we're going to go big picture, umbrella talk about first of all the attitudes towards sexuality, attitudes towards sexuality and disability. We'll talk a little bit about that, the American history of how sexuality has and attitudes toward the sexual life of people with disabilities have shaped our service systems. Then we're going to talk about where we kind of are right now, how this ongoing 200-year conversation has boiled down to and really always revolves around rights, risk, and responsibility. And so we'll dive into each one of those ideas. What do we mean by rights? What are the essential components? What do we mean by responsibility? Whose responsibility? And then risk, not just risk toward the person, right? That's prevention of abuse, neglect, exploitation, 100% important. But what about times where the person we support has patterns or preferences or impulse issues or pathology or something like that that poses a risk to others sexually or what we think is sexually, housemates, staff, community members, etc. How do we deal with those situations? We're going to keep coming back to this idea of standards of human behavior. And that's where some difficult questions get asked, like on the next slide. We'll talk about common mistakes that are made, probably that you've seen that we made last week, probably in our system. We're always screwing stuff up, but our goal is to make a different mistake next time, to learn, to get better, to keep developing. And at the end, we'll kind of wrap it in a little package here that if y'all have seen any of my talks on dignity of risk will be familiar to you. A way to at least say, are we checking the boxes for decision making, for how we go about careful, considerate, longitudinal decision making? All right. So here is, and then most importantly, one of the goals is this is to generate ideas to cover in session two, or should ICPN choose to have more talks about this. It's certainly popular. I mean, I've done a few trainings over the years for ICPN. I think the last one in August, the same topic, we had like 800 people. Today we got over 400. So that's, 1,200 people across Illinois, or maybe joining in from other areas. Um, Thank you for doing that. And I'm not surprised because everybody's like, what do we, oh my God, this is like the topic at times, and what do we do about it? So if you have ideas for other specifics in this area, obviously not about individuals, and I can't do individual consultation during a training, but like, more honed topics in this, or anything really, just ask them and we'll compile that. I know we got a bunch from the August iteration of this, and hopefully we'll get a bunch from today. So you can post in the chat, and Danielle will help me look at those. Or if you have emails for Amy or Danielle or other folks at ICPN, um, email them, and we will figure it out what to do next with these ideas. All right, first question that I will pose. I'm going to pose a few different questions during this training. You don't have to answer them in the chat, but I would ask that you swirl about them in your head, that they cause some level of self-reflection on this topic, on your own practice, which is what we are constantly doing. Just so you know, like every time I'm asked to do a training, I'm like, "God, why like, okay, I'll do it," but I also have a huge amount of self-doubt that I don't always feel like I know what I'm doing. I get scared of the people I work with who are like, I know what I'm doing, because typically that falls apart because the next person that comes in to the clinic, to our referral process, we have no ideas for. There is no one answer to any of these questions. You are not going to leave this training being like, aha, that's the answer. This is how we do it. So the first question I'm posing here is, do we, at least sometimes, hold the people we support to higher standards than we hold ourselves? That you can get away with stuff, right? You can know when nobody's at home and slam your door and swear and, like really kind of go off and not have a consequence for it, right? And people need to learn. They don't learn without consequences. Um, how easy is it to um, be like, they can't do that? This person can't do that. Or, but do you do it? Like if somebody chooses not to take their meds, or they choose to have like eat really poorly, or not follow doctor's advice, or, flirt with somebody in a way that's like a little off sideways, not crossing any clear physical boundaries, but like, that's not really like good game, man. How do we go after them? And I see somebody in chat say, yeah, client expresses they feel like they're under a magnifying glass. So we'll talk about a little bit when we get to the direct support end of things. I interviewed a ton of direct support staff about these questions for my dissertation about sexuality and risk. And what they said constantly was, it's like we're asked to look at them under a microscope all the time. And that causes behaviors that makes our job harder. And there's a concept from Foucault. Here's a nerd alert, okay? But if anybody wants something to put on their reading, put on History of Madness by Foucault. And Foucault is a French philosopher who talks about the history of disability, history of psychiatric control and containment, discipline, punishment. And he talks about something called the panopticon, where the panopticon is if you were constantly being monitored. It's how some prisons are set up, where you can't see the guards, but they can always see you. And that is a really similar to what a lot of folks I've supported talk about. They're like I'm always being monitored, like I don't have privacy, like I'm still paying for something that happened 10 years ago, that I'll never get away from it, that this, that, and the other. So, seeing a lot of agreement about that. And Danielle, tell me if you're seeing other stuff. Um, We hold people to higher standards about general behavior, so like anger, frustration, stress management, decision making, medical decision making? Do we hold them to higher standards of intimate relationship skills? Like, what is the bar for being able to have sex? What's the bar for, like, would how much support would you need if you did actually have, or would people think that you need if you did actually write down that worst thing you've ever done? And then straight up sexuality. So intimate relationship can just be, creating friendships, taking a chance with somebody, being vulnerable, etc. Um, and how much, that we expect there to be no mistakes. So all of those aspects. But then we get to sexuality. And if we look back, so 1800s, kind of the beginning of, we had community care before the training schools, but then the training schools, and then the menace of the feeble-minded propaganda that occurred in the 1860s to 1940s, really, where the sexuality of people with disability was pathologized and they were considered a threat to the moral fiber of the United States, and which led to some large-scale institutional practices and sterilization, the eugenics movements, where we forcibly sterilized tens of thousands of people. And I say we because this is part of our legacy, right? This is part of the system we work in, is that same system just a few decades out. Um, so if we look at this storyline since the 1800s, continuing to today, perspectives on sexuality have played a key role in the formation of our systems of supports. We can talk about human rights. We can talk about institutionalization. We can talk about psychosurgery. We can talk about pretty much any part of disability treatment or supports in the legacy of the United States systems. And it does, you can bring it back to what was the attitude about sexuality at that time of people with disabilities, and how does that act as a corollary for what we were doing? And you could also say attitudes about sexuality. We can go macrocosm system, we can go microcosm in each and every house you run, in each every person. The attitudes towards sexuality of that person in that household, of the staff, of the management, of the system, of the state, really determine a huge amount of the practices that we have around privacy, around alone time, around um, time without paid supports, about relationship development, about like masturbation, all of these things. So Conway, 1976, this is a fascinating book. This book is called Human Sexuality and the Mentally Retarded. And so when I was doing research on this, I saw the name of the book and I was like, oh, God, oh, that's uncomfortable. But that was the term at the time, right? And looking back at terminology and disabilities, interesting as well. Mental retardation was a forward movement when the term changed in the 1940s. It changed from the term feeble-minded, where the sub-diagnoses were idiot, imbecile, and moron. That's part of our legacy. If we were just doing this training 100 years ago, 80, 75 years ago, we would still be using the term feeble-minded, idiot, imbecile, and moron. So this Conway book, we'll have a few quotes from it. Human Sexuality and the Mentally Retarded. You can find it still. It is super progressive, super forward-leaning in 1976. And as Conway reminds us here, our culture's inability or refusal to deal with the very real sexual needs of people with intellectual disability has been the primary impediment to every far-sighted ideological proposal since Wilbur's advocacy of community placement in the 1850s. So just to underline that idea that it can be hush hush, but the hush hush part of it also influences our practices. In fact, and this is just the briefest history timeline, and obviously there's more subtlety to this and crossovers. But first, students and citizens, we had family living and community placement in the 1700s. Maryland had basically what is family living, prove disability status, prove financial need and residency, and the county would pay for a person to receive whatever services or supports or medical stuff they had at the time. Then the institutional uh, world of calling people wards and treating as a threat to society. Then the movement towards eternal children, society is a threat to them, which was kind of 1940s to, my goodness, now it kind of continues sometimes, to the 80s advocacy movements. Hearing voices stronger of the folks who receive supports, human rights focus, and then back around to risk, that the risk conversations are kind of like seeds that sit in the soil of our practices, and ideas around risk like containment or surgery or um, prohibitions on sexuality, all of those things, those seeds are ready to grow if they're watered, right? And so we have to be constantly weeding the garden to make sure that we are not rehashing the same conversations that we had 100 years ago. All right. So, Dave Hengsberger, Susan Tuff, out of Ontario. I forget the name of their agency up there. Dave, unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but look up, if you're not familiar with Dave Hengsberger, there may be no more influential voice in sexual rights for people with disabilities than Dave over the last few decades. It was the drum he constantly beat, and he breaks it down into pretty direct statements. People with developmental disabilities can develop healthy sexual relationships if they live in healthy systems. And this was the cornerstone of Dave's work and Susan's work, and my buddy Jim Hoven's work, who we'll talk about. Jim, have some thoughts from him as we go along. For a long time, that yes, we can develop healthy sexual relationships if they live in healthy systems. And we spend a lot of time. I'm a behavior guy, right? I do write behavior support plans, etc. My main goal in a behavior support plan is change the behavior of people around the person and change the environment, change the ecology, rather than change the person. That person has support needs. Let's accommodate those support needs. We can teach along the way and people gain new skills, but most of the bang for our buck is changing the reactions of folks around them, helping to over time adjust the attitudes of the folks providing support, whether that's guardians or direct support staff or family members or agency attitudes, etc. That if we can change what goes on around the person, then often the person comes along with us and they're less stressed out and have more room to learn new skills. The best reinforcement programs are not about changing the person, they're about changing our responses to the person, changing our behavior first. So that's what Dave's telling us here. People with developmental disabilities can develop healthy sexual relationships if they live in healthy systems. Guess what? We are the system. Each one of you. Maybe there are folks from the state of Illinois in the training. Maybe they're family members. Maybe there are people who receive supports. Maybe there are behavior folks or psychologists or MDs, or I hope there's folks from every part of the system because each one of you and me are part of the system. Are we healthy in terms of our knowledge, our training, our checking in with our judgments about the people we support? Because it's super easy to have a judgment about an individual, even if we go individual case. Oh, well, yeah, everybody but that person. And to remember to check ourselves to say, do I have a bias here? Am I confirming my own theory? Am I basically causing the problem that I keep trying to solve? That a personal responsibility, a responsibility to anybody who writes policy. Um, Here's a question I'll throw out that we'll come back around to. Those of you at any agency, does your agency have a sexuality policy about that covers things like masturbation, privacy, What if a person has questions? Who do they go to? It doesn't have to be super complex, but is there any policy about sexuality? We have policies about so many things, right? Like a ridiculous amount of things that you have to have policies for. Do you have a sexuality policy? I'll tell you what, even when I was running an agency for years, like probably had the kind of tag as like the best agency to work with folks with sexual risk. That's kind of why I got asked to run that agency because I my work, and I realized real quick after working there for a year, I was like, wait a second, we don't have a sexuality policy. I actually called Dave Hingsberger and I was like, can you give me a cheat sheet? We need to write a policy. And that was not that long ago. That was like 2018, 2017. So even at some of the agencies who, in at least where I am, where we had a focus on sexuality, we didn't have the policy. That's not a healthy system. A healthy system cannot act in a haphazard way. It can't be, it has to be, a healthy system is proactive, not reactive. A healthy system grows over time, it develops, it changes. It addresses problems rather than it just letting it fester. So, some of you are like, we've talked about this before. I've heard Buckles talk about this before. I was in that training in 2020. We talked about this during COVID times. I had a very similar uh, discussion through ICPN. Um, and online training. So you're like, yeah, we heard that in 2020. And then we did it in 2024. And then we just did it again in 2025. And now we're doing it again in 2025. We've had similar sessions introducing many of these concepts. And so when I was writing this one, let me just be clear. I got a little frustrated with myself, thinking about, oh, these were things I committed to do in my system that I haven't really done. And always is the case when hopefully when you're writing trainings or when you're sitting in them or something that you reflect back and you're like, I gotta like follow through. And then I got a little frustrated of like, I know some folks out there in different systems, not just Illinois, where it's like gung ho, let's talk about this. And then we go back a few years later and nothing's changed. And I get it. I get it. It is hard to get the wheels of these trucks moving, of these trains, really. We're talking about moving a huge train. So after these talks, for anybody who's been in some of them, some of you it's the first time, so you get off, we'll give you a pass. But if you've heard me talk before or heard anybody talk about these concepts before, did your support systems actually change in regard to sexuality? That it can be a feel-good topic of like, hell yeah, that's right, human rights, we're going to do this, and then nothing actually happens. And no, it's there's so many cogs in the system, so many bureaucratic cogs. I get it. You may really try, and it just doesn't click over to the next click, right? But ask ourselves, why is this so hard? Why is it so hard to actually get that train moving to the next station? What keeps it in place? What is the inertia against it? And I worked for the state of New Mexico for a long time. I was statewide clinical director. There's a really good thing about bureaucracy is you can't do anything really fast, typically, which stops bad decisions from like getting into the mainstream super quick. That there's a lot of balances, a lot of checks on it, and that's good. But it also can gum up the works of actually getting anything done. So there's so many different reasons that you may be like, yeah, I really wanted to change it, but there were all these things in my way. So the charge here is to say whether or not the next time we talk, will anything have changed? It doesn't mean some groundbreaking change has occurred, but has there even just been a conversation about what we could change? Oops, there we go. So now we're going to dive into kind of the three main um, tiers of this, the three main supports, right? Of if we're going to build a system around healthy sexuality, what are the three parts that we need to address? First R is rights. Within rights, talking about the right to safety, the right to education, the right to privacy, dignity, and relationships. We'll dive into each of those in more detail. Second part, responsibility. That if we're going to have move forward, that there's responsibility that needs to be taken. Folks we support have responsibilities of self-management. That's something that we talk about a lot in our system of addressing sexual risk towards others. It's not just a matter of nothing bad has happened since the last time we met. It's a matter of has the person developed self-management skills? Have they started to say, I get it. All right, I should probably back off here. Or this isn't the right place. Or I should leave right now because I'm having, I'm getting uncomfortable. The responsibility of honesty that we talked about, oh, you got to tell us everything in your life. Yes, we do need honesty. We need to take our responsibility to say in an appropriate way, having a place where a person can be honest, but it's not broadcast publicly and responsibility about keeping boundaries that and understanding boundaries that goes to self-management with an overarching thing I forgot to put in this little list, our own responsibilities. Responsibility starts with us as the system. Are we providing opportunities to develop this? Are we integrating these ideas into our plans, into our policies? And this is not in any hierarchy. This is not like, oh, here's the third most important. This is dreadfully important as well. All of these kind of equal importance, kind of like, the legs on a three-legged stool. You take away any one of them, you're not going to be able to keep sitting there for very long. Risk that we take an honest, forthright, constant, and longitudinal look at risk. The easy conversations are when it's about and it's not easy, but easy relatively. Um, when the person themselves is at risk for exploitation, we're seeing a major rise in like online exploitation and online boundaries and et cetera. Um, uh, and then it's easier to protect a person, right? What's our go-to. That's like the oh, we'll just keep them safe. There's risks in how safe we keep people. That's like the dignity of risk, duty of care balance. What about risk to peers, risk to housemates? When one housemate is crossing the boundaries of other housemates, physically, sexually, often. I will underline this repeatedly, but I'm going to start with the underlining right now. The number one frequency, the highest frequency of sexual boundary events that we see in our system over 20 years of data, of actually keeping data on it, being honest with ourselves, and that I see in other systems where I've worked is peer to peer, housemate to housemate, really going up there. And there's so many oddities within that is there any consequence? Does anybody who gets the consequence? Who moves? Does somebody move? Is there any report filed? Obviously, if it's from a staff member or a family member toward a person with disabilities, that there's a boundary violation, we do something about that. But when it's peer to peer, what happens? Even though that's our highest frequency event. Next highest frequency event is risk towards staff. Staff who, on the course of their day-to-day work, are encountering having their physical or sexual boundaries violated, whether it's verbally or physically. And how do we address that? How do we support our support staff and understand the the real tangled knot that creates? And then I'm not saying it's less important, but it is less frequent as risk to the community, like impulsive actions in the community toward folks that are not known, right? That are just encountered in the community. We'll talk about each of those. All right, so let's start off with rights. All right, so I was going to call this training Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll because you'd get a lot of people signing up for that. But we're not talking about drugs. So it's just kind of sex and rock and roll that I'm left with, which, if you only got to choose two out of three, that's pretty good, two out of the three to choose. So here's your little rock and roll. Grateful Dead, My Heart and Soul. Their lyrics speak to several parts of my life, but I chose them for this topic. There are things you can replace and others you cannot, right? There are things that if it breaks, if it falls apart, we can figure it out. And there are other things that you cannot replace. The time has come to weigh those things. The space is getting hot. Um, so what do I mean by that? Be careful what we take away. Be careful what you disallow. Be careful what becomes forbidden because you may not be able to replace it. It may not be intentional. It may just be happenstance. It may be death by a thousand cuts, right? Like little by little by little over time, all of a sudden, this person's life has become the size of a marble, and we didn't even realize it happened. We've got to look back. We've got to weigh those things. We've got to understand that there are things we cannot replace. And let's talk about that in terms of the topic of today. Oops. Oh, there we go, slide. All right. So, state of Illinois. Different standards in every state, different. In fact, most of the time when we look at state statements or state policies or legislative acts or whatever we're calling this is a public act, there's no mention of sexuality in the disability standards. That would be the most common thing. So this just came out not that long ago. I think this was what was one of the spurring motivations for having us talk about these things was the state of Illinois. I'm going to guess it was 2023. It might have been 2022. Um, Enacted this in Public Act 101, whatever it says up there. The little screen is in the way of me telling. Healthy sexual practices. So the state of Illinois is defining healthy sexual practices in their disability standards, right? So for disability agencies, which probably all of you are either connected to or have some format to, maybe work for the state, maybe helped write this. Healthy sexual practices means a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. Cool. I don't know if I've ever achieved all of those at one time, but that's the goal. I'd like to have high goals. So if we're going to have healthy sexual practices, the state of Illinois says we have to have these things in place: access to sex education, access to related resources. Okay, what are related resources? That's probably defined somewhere. Maybe, maybe not. I would, like physicians and family planning and sex education, counseling or couples counseling, whatever, related resources, right? And treatment planning, so that's like your behavior plan, your healthcare plans, other therapy plans, right? Like speech language could have aspects of this, or occupational therapy or physical therapy can have aspects of these. Treatment planning that supports a person's right to sexual health and healthy sexual practices up here. Uh, and to be free from sexual exploitation and abuse. Hell yeah, free from it, zero, right? We had a few very difficult cases in New Mexico several years ago. Like COVID threw a lot of sticks in the spokes, right? Like our system, the vulnerabilities of our systems were really exposed during that time, especially how, I mean, I don't think any of us were ignorant of this fact, but direct support staff are the cornerstone of everything. Family members and direct support staff, they're the cornerstone of everything. While many of us who weren't in direct support got to retreat into our offices and do stuff through screens, they were there every day. And we saw less, at least where I am, we saw less direct support staff. Like people were quitting. People were getting sick. People were like, I'm not going to do this. So now we had higher ratios of, we went from having two staff in a house to one, or from three staff in a house to one all the time. And all kinds of stuff started happening. And so we had a couple really difficult cases that pushed our legislature and our governor to be like, zero. We have a zero tolerance. To be clear about it, we'd always hopefully had zero tolerance for sexual exploitation and abuse, but this became a very bright line, like, to the point it was on the news like repeatedly about this, which you don't see intellectual disability services on the news that much. They were on the news a lot. Um, so what else does this act say? There must be substantial emphasis on prevention of pregnancy, sexually transmitted infection, and stress that abstinence is the ensured method of avoiding pregnancy and STI. that there is a burden or a expectation that disability providers teach recipients to avoid behavior that could be interpreted as unwanted sexual advances. Okay, so that is to me like that's a really important sentence. That's the crux of my work is when a person we support has patterns that place other people at sexual risk. And themselves how to reject unwanted sexual advances. You can have both in the same person, right? They're both a potential, have the potential for offense, and they are higher likelihood of being offended against. Um, and that we are able to teach people to explain signs of possible dangers from potential predators. So there's that avoiding crossing boundaries with others and then protecting one's own boundaries. So, what's embedded within those statements about rights? Primarily is safety. That is the number one right. It is foundational to quality support programs, day programs, residential programs, et cetera, that when you are with us, you are safe. It is the keystone to trauma-informed care. As you know, I probably this is not news to anybody, but maybe it is. Maybe somebody's new in the field. Here's a devastating fact. Folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities are at roughly four times, experience four times the rate of sexual and physical abuse than the general population. We have estimates up into the 80s, high 80% that over the lifetime of a person with intellectual disability, there is over an 80% chance that that person will experience sexual violation. Oftentimes it's before they get to us, maybe in high school and before they come into professional services, but it happens in professional services too. So the right to safety, that when you are with us, you will not get hurt. Talking to direct support professionals over the years, saying what keeps you in this job, even though all the threats to your job, all of the difficulties. One of the things that many folks have said to me over the years is because I know when I'm on shift, they won't get hurt. Wow, what a heavy weight to have on one's shoulders as direct staff to say, I'm keeping this job because I know in my 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours in the day, that person's safe. I can't guarantee it the other times, but when they're with me, they won't get hurt. And I'll also do the laundry and do meds and do all the cooking and the transport and be the shoulder to cry on and all of that. But I'm also like somewhat of a protective factor in this person's life. The right to safety. So that can be physical safety, sexual safety, emotional safety, financial safety, freedom from abuse. That our goal should be zero over the course of a year. And if that is depending on your role, you could say my goal is zero, and I'm direct support staff, so therefore zero on my shift. If you're a house manager, zero in my house. If you're a service coordinator, as we call them here, you have a set of houses, zero in my houses. Zero in my agency at the state level, zero in my state. Freedom from abuse, and to look at each one of those cases and where mistakes were made, where things do happen, that having a zero standard, we're not going to ever say there's an acceptable amount of abuse, of neglect, of exploitation. That a person has the right to lifelong education. That does your agency, does the state, do your staff have access to sexual education, to relationship education, to adult level or individually honed for a person's communication support needs, education about relationships, sexuality, online safety, what you're seeing on the internet, that there are spaces for people to ask individually, or there are opportunities for more traditional kind of classroom concepts of education. That a person and the people we support have system-wide trauma-informed practices as a foundational right. Trauma-informed basically means, we assume trauma has happened. that just like an EMT, when they're going up to the scene of an accident, assumes the folks there are hurt. And our first goal is no more victims, right? So we take care of the environment when we approach the scene of an accident, and then maybe place a neck brace on that person. Our job is the psychological neck brace that we're going to assume this person has been hurt. If we're wrong, we're not doing any more harm here. Just like if a person's neck is not actually hurt, putting on the neck brace is not causing them harm. But if it is hurt and we don't see it, we are preventing there from being that cascading injury. System-wide trauma-informed practices also means that our staff members, the families we support, have access to and are treated from a trauma-informed perspective. That trauma-informed practice is not just about people with disabilities, that we do it for them. We do it for each other, that everybody's doing the best they can with the story of their life to date. And our job is to write the next chapter. That what's going to be in the chapter, right? That parts of the story have already been written. We can't do anything about that. The person's medical status, their intellectual disability status, cognitive differences, their abuse history, education history. Often, okay, that's happened. We are the next sentence of their story. They are the main character. What's the next sentence? What's the next paragraph? What's the next page? What's the next chapter of their story? What character will you be in it? How will you be spoken of down the line? The right to privacy. Oh my goodness, that's such a tangled web on in waiver systems, disability systems. Like it's a person's room when it comes down to it, it's their bedroom. It's the last bastion that many folks we support have of privacy. That I don't know, I get enjoyment out of like driving by myself places or sometimes going out by myself, right? That's a form of privacy. Or knowing when, my family's not home or something like that. Oh, I can have the house to myself. Do the people you support ever have time to themselves at their house, not their room? Because is that really being by yourself? No, you're just in a room with other people who can come in and knock at any time. And that I get it. There are support needs that require that, right? Like medical issues or concerns about safety. So when there is an opportunity for privacy, are we respecting that right? Have we maximized it? When I have taught special education students in years past, meaning people getting their master's degrees to be special education teachers, I go off, I go off on tangents, obviously. One of the tangents I go off on is about how does bathroom time go for your students? Some kids, maybe they have CP, maybe they have other support needs, maybe behavioral support needs or privacy support needs or whatever, and you have to accompany them in the bathroom, or you're doing this at your houses. And maybe you need to be in the bathroom with them. Are you maximizing privacy during that time? Even by just turning to the side and saying, nobody should be staring at you while you're doing this. I want you to know that we have taught people that there are respect boundaries that should occur. I know when I was doing personal care, changing folks' undergarments, you get kind of used to it. It's just something you kind of do. And you can get a little clinical about it and a little blasé. And I had a coworker thankfully be like, dude, what are you doing? This was when I was like 20. He was like, "What are you doing, bro?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "You can't just go and start taking his pants off, dude. You need to ask him." And I thought he was like this elder, and so I was listening to him. He was like 27, but he was like, "Man, you need to ask like every step." He's like, "You've been taught that," and I was like, "You're right. I have been taught that, and I just wasn't doing it because he wasn't fighting back. He was just letting me do it. That's a risk, right? If somebody's like, "Go ahead, take my pants off." Um, and so we started providing this young man, hey, he didn't have verbal language, but he could hit you, he could smack you. That's fine with me. I'd rather get smacked than have him just go along with having his right to privacy disrespected and not knowing that he had the right to tell us stop or no. So privacy has all those tendrils, right? Of time to oneself, time when I'm not being observed, uh, private parts of one's life that they maybe share with one person, they don't have to share with everybody, and we don't need to be writing down everywhere, which is part of dignity. Dignity is not something that people just have. Dignity is transactional. Dignity is provided by those around us, how they speak about us, how they respond to us in times of need, how they respond to us when we are embarrassed or when we have done something we, maybe shouldn't have done. How do we speak about the people we support? What terms do we use? How do we include people in conversations or not include them in conversations? How do we, you know, just even talking about like elopement, this is a little bit on the side, but that's like a really common word in disability services, elopement. Oh, they eloped. I swear this is not a lie. The first time I got the call that a person I supported eloped, I thought they meant they got married. I was like, really? Like to who? Like that's out of nowhere. And they're like, no, we went AWOL. And I was like, AWOL? Like, I didn't know that we had like, I don't know, it's like army terms for this. And they're like, he left, man. We don't know where he is. Okay, cool. Got that. We started calling it unplanned independent community outings. Because we were getting in trouble with people for having too many elopements. So we just started writing it down as unplanned independent community outings. And all of a sudden, people were like, oh, that's great. They're unplanned. Yeah, absolutely. Independent, amazing. In the community and getting out there. Same thing, different terms, which was a more dignified way, and also playing around with, state language, which was always fun. Um, the rights to relationships, that's foundational in the Center for Medicaid Standards, is that unless there is specific human rights allowance for a restriction or from a guardian or from a judge who is guiding some guardianship decisions, you cannot prevent people from having relationships of their choosing and having visitors of their choosing. Um, so those rights. Oh, so it's easy. We just take care of those rights. Those are a whole bunch of things, right? This can be overwhelming. I think that's sometimes why progress does not get made because, oh my God, I don't know what to do. There's each one of those things. Well, we pick one, pick one, pick one. Start chipping away at it. If that's your kind of ballywick, right? Your area of most potency within the field. So with sexuality, often we just see a removal of it. We don't talk about it, or it's not allowed, or there's so many barriers to it that people give up, that they just stop trying. We had a person say that just a few weeks ago where we were interviewing them because it's a serious risk situation. The person has a history that's very concerning. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like a lot of bad stuff has happened. People have been hurt. Um, and we're trying to balance mitigating risk with continuing this person's rights to have safely supported relationships. And he basically said, I give up, dude. I don't even care anymore. Um, and we inherited this years down the line, and I understand where decisions were made. But one thing was taken away, it wasn't replaced. And as Dave and Susan remind us, it's as unethical for therapists to take away one behavior without replacing it with another, right? If we're going, this is basic kind of um, differential reinforcement uh, programs. My favorite of, if I'm going to have to do a reinforcement program, it's going to be a DR program, differential reinforcement, DRA, typically, differential reinforcement of alternate behavior. So with Mike, who's smacking us all the time because he doesn't want us to touch him or help him with his undergarment changes, we gave him cards that he could hand us that said, "Get the hell away from me." Said it in a more direct manner because he thought that was funny to give us a GTFO card. And so he could give us a card that said GTFO and we would bounce, right? We're out. We didn't take away, we were saying, please don't hit us, but we replaced it with something else, right? We are honoring the message. And so sexuality, that becomes very complex, right? Like people's sexual lives have been taken away from them, What are we replacing it with, though? Are we attending to what we can attend to in terms of intimacy, not just sexual, but like emotional intimacy, friendship, trust, fun, etc. Um, how do you replace sexuality? You can't really replace it, but we have to just say sexuality is not just one thing. Sexuality is not just physical intercourse with another person. It is also how we treat our bodies, how we find pleasure in our own selves, how we find connection and relationship emotionally with other people, how we feel like we belong, right? That we are part of something. Um, a great book. I don't think I have a quote about it in here, so it's not in the reference list, but it's called The Facts of Life and More by Leslie Walker Hirsch, who she's a huge voice. She wrote the Circles program back in the 80s, which was about, circles of contact, circles of physical contact. Who am I intimate with? Who can I give a hug to? Who can I give a side hug to? Who do I shake hands with? Who do I just give a fist bump to? And who don't I touch? That's kind of Leslie's a real watered down version of the Circles program. But she talks a lot about sexuality as often as soon as people hear the word sex, they start talking about intercourse. That's not the full gamut of sexuality. The full spectrum would be how we treat ourselves. It starts with hygiene. It starts with understanding your own body. It starts with terminology. It starts with friendships and relationship development and trust and emotional intimacy, all those things I keep saying. So back to Hingsberger and Tuff, it would be cruel to work with people with disabilities. Sorry. So state of Illinois says provide education. We're saying education is a right. We're saying sexual privacy is a right. Let's do all these things. Let's provide this information because we have to. Even if I don't want to, I have to, so I'm going to do it. And as they remind us, it's cruel to work with people with disabilities, incorporate sexuality and eroticism into their sense of self and their expectations, and then leave them in the very system that forced them to divorce themselves from their sexuality in the first place. That's why I asked the questions. Did anything change in your services? Has anything changed in my services since the last time I talked about this? Where I'm like in the back of my head as I'm talking, I'm like, ah, God, we're still screwing around with this that we know is a problem. Have we actually done anything? If we don't change our systems, we've not changed anything. We can educate all we want. That's like showing somebody a menu, teaching about all these kinds of foods, right? Hey, let me take you out to my favorite restaurant. And it's a type of food you've never seen before. Maybe you've heard about. And I'm showing you the menu. Oh my God, look at this. This is so good, right? Oh my God, it's really good. This one I don't like too much, but maybe you would. And showing the whole menu and then being like, yeah, you can't have any of it. We got to go now. How cruel is that? So we have to not just be like, here's, what's possible, but also how do we make it more possible when all of the individual factors are in place? So, in your role in the system, question, you can write stuff down right now. You can write it on a little note to yourself. You can take this to bed with you tonight and swirl it through your head. I post one on the side of my computer at times. In your role in the system, what will you commit to do to improve the access to relationship and sexual rights of the people you support? It doesn't mean that everybody just has the doors open and we just let everything go, right? When we get to the very end, when we talk about risk and care decisions, this is not just, well, you know what? We just got to open the doors, I guess, and everybody just does what they want. I get that response a lot, right? When people are agitated about talking about rights, that somehow the interpretation is that this is black and white. Either we're preventing it and we're wrong, or we just let everybody do everything. Definitely have had that yelled in my face. So you're just saying, just let people do whatever they want. No, I'm saying in each of our roles with each of the people we support, how do we move a little bit forward? How do we improve access to these rights in a careful, considered, consultative manner? that we may not move as fast as we want to, and all the ways that we know that we could, but how do we move forward a little bit? A little goes a long way. Responsibility. So we have within those opening access, opening ideas, opening options, we have responsibilities. And the people that we support have increased responsibility of handing over the reins. Back to the rock and roll. You can't overlook the lackjack of any other highway to ride. We got to be on this one. We don't have other roads. This is the road we're on. But it's got no signs or dividing lines and very few rules to guide. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go down this highway of like, we're going to do better about sexual rights. We're going to do better about this. We're driving this train. But how? Where are the boundaries? Where are the safety mechanisms? How do you do this? What if I get in trouble? Yeah, there's very few signs or dividing lines, very few rules to guide. You've got that stuff from state of Illinois. That's great. Those are great statements. But what does it actually mean? How do you do that? Like I was just saying, the guideposts, the factors, the supports differ for each person. That part of good sexuality policy is that you can't write a policy for one person, right? You're not writing the policy for the hardest person or the most challenging person in your agency. You're writing a policy that kind of can cover everybody. And then we look at exceptions to policies based upon individual complications. So this level of individuality, especially about these, requires creative approaches, um, interdisciplinary approaches. We've had speech language folks step up to the plate and be like, I've got an idea about how we can talk about this. You might think speech language separate, right? Oh, this is behavioral, this is nursing, this is not really in the domain or scope of speech language. No, how do we communicate these ideas? How do we help somebody gain language and communication, right? If they don't speak verbally, how can we look at occupational therapy to have different devices of communication? Or when it's looking at how does a person treat their own body and how can we influence and improve their sense of privacy and dignity, even during showering and bathrooming, physical therapists. How do we help somebody uh, achieve more independent hygiene so they're not constantly being touched and having their boundaries kind of wishy-washy with how other people can touch them? Direct support staff, huge, should be at every meeting about this because all of it comes down to, is it achievable in the house? Family ideas, different cultural ideas. I'm sure, New Mexico, we're highly diverse across our state. And I know if I'm working in the Northwest of our state, it's a lot different conversation than if I'm working in Albuquerque. And we need to have different creative ideas in those different cultures, right? Uh, different. And what do I mean by culture? Basically, the way we do things around here is kind of where my simplest, direct, and I inherited that from Ruth Luckison years ago in a class. She's like, we're just going to define culture as the way we do things around here. So, how do we change the way we do things around here? Or how do we help and get to understand how the folks in that house, in that community, do things around there? And where are there spaces for creativity? And what are our guideposts there? To go back to the top, do we sometimes hold the people we support to higher standards than we hold ourselves? Because that comes into the responsibility conversation a lot of they need to have consequences. If there's any behavior folks out there who work from a primarily positive behavior support perspective or positive approaches, et cetera, I'm sure you've heard this where it's like, you're not going to learn without consequences. I think we learn a lot without consequences. In fact, I think there's a lot of times I didn't get a consequence for things I've done. Maybe I should have, and I still learned because I am like, whew. Also, does there need to be a constant stream of consequences for everything that always happens? What if you had to pay for every single thing you did? Why is that? Um, there's a multitude of answers to this. This is again out of this Cruz de la Vec Conway book. I think I screwed up the year somewhere. I think it is 1974. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing it's stupid. That sometimes we are asking people to demonstrate skills they've never been taught, to demonstrate skills they'll never need. Um, when we were assessing a young man, he came down from a very rural part of our state, came to Albuquerque, which is a city. Any Chicago folks out there would be like, yeah, Albuquerque is a city. We're like 1/6 or 1/8 the size of Chicago. Love Chicago, one of my favorite American cities. Um, so anyway, he came down and we did all of our assessments, behavioral, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language, and a medical doctor. And we're like, oh my God, he has so many support needs. He needs this, he needs that. And his parents, when they got the report, called us and said, what kid are you talking about? Well, we had taken him out of his very rural environment where he lives on a ranch that's 15 miles from the nearest crossroads where there's a flashing yellow light, and he's helping to train feral or wild horses and tame them, and is brilliant at it, as we found out when we went up there. We brought him to the city and said, cross a street. And we're like, look at this guy. God, he needs us arm in arm crossing a street. We were judging him by abilities he never would have to have in an environment he was never going to spend time. He is a ranching kid, northeastern New Mexico. We got out of our blinders and went up there. And who looked more like they had more support needs than we did? I don't know how to behave around a horse, especially a wild horse that's just starting to be tamed. Um, we needed to look at the support needs in his context, right? That's foundational to building support systems, that it's done within the context of the person's life, of what is actually going on. So if we're going to hold people accountable, which is part of this algebra, right? When somebody has cross boundaries, when they have a pattern of that or are failing to take responsibility or self management, if we're going to hold them accountable, we need to make sure they understand what they're accountable for. It's my least favorite part of thing that happens is we never told the person, like in a basic behavior program, oh, if you punch a hole in the wall, you're going to have to pay for it. We cannot make up behavior programs at the moment. The person needs to know that up front, right? That needs to be agreed to. Hey, look, we understand when you get angry, you punch stuff. So here's what we're going to do. You understand money, you have access to money. Um, we can connect the dots here. It's not just some random consequence. But next time we're going to charge, right? Like there's going to be some, fee involved with property damage. Can't just do it willy-nilly off the bat, right? And then we also need a corollary program about how does the person earn money for demonstrating more, kind of wanted skills around stress and anger management that they get, paid off when they do the right choice, right? We don't just charge for wrong choices. Anyway, that's an aside on basic behaviorism and human rights-based behaviorism. So we got to make sure people understand what they're accountable for and provide the tools for ongoing support and follow through. That we can't just assume that people know stuff. Oh, you don't just go up to people like that. How do they know? What level of sexual education did the folks we support receive before us? What level have they received since they came to us? Um, and what are we going to do next, right? And then all the subtleties around that. And does the person understand the consequences, the accountability we're talking about? So therefore, the responsibility starts with us. Um, and my underlining of this stems from conversations over the course of years about this topic where a valid point is made where maybe we're overcorrecting for the sins of the past with institutionalization and mistreatment, and denial of sexuality as the foundational aspect of those systems, where some direct support staff, some family members go, yeah, but the people we support have responsibility too. I get that. And so integrating that, we'll talk about that in a second. But if you're going to hold other people accountable, hold yourself accountable first. The responsibility starts with us. Did we provide the person the information? Did we provide it in a way that was accessible to them? Did we provide it over time? A real basic example of this is a person I worked with for a while where, oh my God, it was just This doesn't have anything to do with sexuality, but it's a good analogy to how we hold people accountable for things they don't know. It was about his room being clean. He's in family living, not with a related blood family, but with a family that chose to have somebody come live at their house. And they had a pretty high standard of clean. I was like, don't come to my house because then you're gonna judge me. Like, dang. I leave dishes in the sink sometimes, and I don't like wash down my shower stall every single time I take a shower. That was part of their culture. That's how they did it. And so they wanted a program about clean your room, clean your room. He won't clean his room. He won't clean his room. He won't clean his room. I got this so much. And I was like, I'd already reached a point in my behavior career where I was like, I'm not writing another clean your room program. People's rooms are their rooms. Then I looked at his room and I was like, all right, okay, I get their point. It's there's some hazards in here that things do need taken care of. And so we were like, why won't he clean his room? And he would tell us, I did. And, oh, he's manipulating you. Because I had to call and ask, do you clean your room? Yes, he cleaned his room. This is a 35-year-old guy, right? Where else I'm like, oh my God, I'm calling this guy to ask if he cleaned his room. What is my job? And he's, oh, I cleaned it. And they'd be like, he's lying to you. He's manipulating you. Which I was like, I don't, I've known him for a while. I don't think he's doing that. And even if he is, fine, whatever. People lie. It's not like I don't need to then like wag my finger at him. Long story short, it comes down to the fact he didn't know what clean meant. To him, he had. He was like, I did this, I did that. Like he is going about his thing, but I don't know. I put stuff away, and he was becoming desperate. And so went to the occupational therapist, speech language, talked to the family, and basically we said, let's help him clean. Let's get the room to the point where you're like, okay, that's acceptable as the people whose house this is, even though it's his room, yada yada. So many tendrils in here. Um, and then we took pictures of it. Took a picture of his bed, took a picture of his bookshelf, took a picture of his floor, took a picture of his bathroom, and we made a book, My Clean Room. And so basically we said, make it look like this. You know what started happening? He started making it look like that. He did not know. He did not, he was being held accountable without understanding what he was accountable for, and he didn't have the tools to do it. That was on us. The responsibility started with us. Then we can say to him, does this look like the picture? I immediately was like, I'm not doing this anymore. We're fine. We have other stuff to do about his life. Um, all right. So we have the responsibility first to provide education, to provide individualized, both access to larger education, online stuff. We have the responsibility to provide education to our staff members about how to train, about how to teach people, about different learning styles. We have the responsibility to provide education. Pardon, gotta have my coffee to keep going. To provide education to the people we support about what are their rights, what is responsibility, what is sexuality, what are boundaries, what is appropriate or inappropriate, what is um, the risks of sexuality, etc. That we have the responsibility to provide and assure people understand relationship development, the difference between a stranger, an acquaintance, and a friend. And how does a friendship turn into something more than a friendship? That what we see on TV is not real. Um, that this kind of meet cute and all of a sudden people are hooking up, or what we may see when people are accessing sexual imagery online, right? Where it's like bing bang boom. That's not how things go. That we understand the longitudinal path of relationship development, concepts of boundaries, right? Of personal space, of one's bubble, of when, who can touch you and when. That is, I've touched on it earlier, so to speak. That the folks we support, often their boundaries are very diffuse because maybe they've had a billion different medical screenings. They're just being touched all the time. They've had tons of surgeries, or their bodies are treated as if they are something to be manipulated because of motor differences or something like that, where they need help with bathrooming or undergarment changes, etc. And so their boundaries become very diffuse. And so we do see folks who think, if you can touch me like that, I can touch you like that. Or uh, don't understand that there are some people you can hug and some people you can't hug, that there are some people you know and some people you don't know, that we have the responsibility to teach and practice honesty. Part of trauma-informed care is trustworthiness, that you can rely on me to be honest with you, that I'm not going to make promises I can't keep, that I will tell you what's going on. Um, and that if I don't know something, I'll tell you I don't know it, that we're not lying to people, and that we also ask them to be honest. That is a huge thing we've worked with some folks who are on the very far end of the spectrum of risk to others, where it's like we're real concerned. There's pathology here, there is a major history, there's been legal involvement, etc. That part of their responsibility to us is to be honest. If you are having troubling thoughts, you're going to tell us. Maybe one person that you tell. Maybe you don't want, to tell a bunch of people. We have some folks who are like, I'll tell everybody if that helps me get more, less restrictions, to move forward in my life. I'll just tell everybody everything. Then we're like, all right, let's back off that. But that people advocate, that we understand that, and the idea of having a voice. I'm less concerned about the people who keep acting out, right? Who keep punching us, because that means they haven't given up. They haven't just given in and say, do whatever you want with me. I guess this is my life. That we never give up on helping somebody find a voice, whether that's through verbal expression, written expression. We have all these tools now with, iPhones and whatnot, where we're seeing people be able to communicate more, and ultimately improving self-management. So if we help somebody have education and we get them to understand and increase understanding of relationship development and concepts of boundaries, and people are becoming more honest with us about their internal world, sexually, attraction wise, troubling thoughts, impulsivity, etc. Ultimately, it comes down to self-management, that you cannot be dependent on me to manage you. We see a lot of folks who become staff dependent or supports dependent. You can see this in basic examples of somebody who won't buckle their own seatbelt, but they wait for a staff member to do it. That's a kind of supports dependency. How do we decrease, where we can safely decrease supports because the person has started to manage themselves? In sexuality and sexual risk, we look for, hey, I really wanted to touch that person, but I didn't. I have a few guys who will call me and be like, "Hey, Buckles, I wanted to tell you, I really wanted to touch somebody this week, but I didn't touch them. I backed off. I'm managing myself." Good, because we've talked about, if you want us to stop managing you, then you need to start managing yourself. And this is how we're going to do it. So we can have a really good containment program where nothing bad happens. Nothing's changing in that program, right? We're basically just saying we're keeping you so contained that you can't get away with anything. Real progress on risk management starts when a person says, I'm going to do a better job myself. I'm gaining skills. I will tell you when I'm having trouble. Question here. If this is the one that's hitting you of like, right, that's a question I was having, or someplace that I have power or influence in my job, in your role in the system, what will you commit to do to improve the understanding of relationship and sexual responsibility for the people you support? That could be for the staff members you support. That could be for the people in services. It could be for family members. It could be for guardianship agencies. That's a place we have a lot of talks. Was about to get kicked out of a guardianship conference a few years back. Now they invite me back because we've continued to have the conversation, because we were talking about, what is a guardian? What are they guarding? It's a heavy duty job title, right? I'm a guardian. What are you guarding? Is my first question. You're not guarding somebody's safety. You are guarding their rights, is the statute laid out within the court orders. Yes, safety can be part of the considerations, it should be, but primarily regarding rights if we're acting as guardians. Anyway, that's an aside. That could be a whole other thing. Um, so maybe you're direct support staff and you're like, okay, maybe with Melinda today when I'm working with her next week, I'll start conversations with her. Like we're watching a TV show and I will ask her, what do you think about like their relationship? How do you think they're getting along? Like maybe it's a sitcom or something. That's moving a little bit forward. Maybe it's a matter of, all right, maybe we need an in-service for our staff if you're in that position to talk about how do you teach relationship and sexual responsibility or what are their thoughts? I was like those first. If I'm working with direct support staff, my first thing is I'm going to sit down and you are going to tell me. You're going to talk to me about what you need. And then we will make trainings or different talks directed at that. So it's not just what I think you need, but tell me how you want, what'll make you better at your job. Because when it comes down to us, we've got to address risk to others, risk to self, risk to staff that and not have it overwhelm us, right? We're going to address it, not contain it, not coerce, but support in a way where risk is mitigated. Last Grateful Dead quote. I am a one-trick pony about my ability to quote music. Don't you let that deal go down. Watch each card you play and play it slow. That we want to prevent and avoid people getting hurt. Don't you let that deal go down. But we've got to play it slow. It is easy to overreact in these situations. It is easy to become reactive, that we have time to take our time. That over the course of our story here, in the kind of my life's work, is when I look back at what we were doing 20 years ago in terms of sexual risk, oh my God, we were babies. We were simplistic, which was fine. That's where we had to start from. And very slowly, like we have a pretty like significant change we're talking about right now and about how we go about doing something clinically or assessment wise. And we were gung ho last week about it. All of us, the kind of core clinical folks, over the course of this week, have each messaged or talked to each other like, hey, let's put the brakes on. Let's not jump into this. Let's do a couple tests. Like, we need to play this slow. We're not sure of the unintended consequences of this change. Watch each card you play, play it slow. Because once a sexual boundary event occurs, there's no taking it back. You cannot unring that bell. It will forever have happened in that person's life, the victim. It will also be forever part of the perpetrators or the boundary crossers record and maybe about how they think about themselves, etc. So a metered, careful approach. Addressing risk. First order of business. Yes, I made this very large and bold. To housemates. Housemate to housemate. Vulnerability is the highest frequency. To underline that again, think about all the complications that occur there. So you have a person, maybe three, four people living together, right? One of them sexually violates, or we think it's sexual, whatever, they violate a person they live with. Terrible situation. And that could be, obviously, there's a spectrum of violation, right? One that can never be taken away. It's happened. The staff member who was there has to deal with that and live with that and think about what was I doing? What could I have done differently? What could I have noticed? The other housemates. But then you have the unintended consequences. Who has to move? If it's like, well, they can't live together, who often gets moved? In my experience, the first suggestion is the person whose boundaries were violated. Well, we need to move them out because it's not safe. And now we have a double trauma. Their boundaries have been violated and they have to move. I get it. I ran a residential agency. It's easier to move the person who got victimized because we're not worried about moving them in with somebody where then they are going to victimize another person, right? We're going to keep them safe. But whoa, hold your horses here. Um, this person who has violated, what was their understanding of it? What was the intention? What so many different things to look at within this. And now they're saying they can stay there. Well, who gets to go to day program? Do they have to see the person who crossed their boundaries? A day program, so many different things to consider. But housemate to housemate risk is your highest frequency. I would bet in your system. We see it everywhere. I've yet to encounter a system where that's not the case. To other peers, so this could be like day program, right? When you're out in the community or at like a community event, peer to peer. So basically, it's peer to peer is highest frequency, housemate to housemate being the highest subset of that. Next highest frequency is to staff. Staff encountering verbal sexual boundary violations, staff encountering physical sexual boundary violations. And what is the culture around that of definitely run into agencies where it's, hey, that's part of the job. Is it? I get it. If you're going to work with this person in this house, let's have a talk. Like, we kind of know what's going to happen. Like, you're probably going to get your butt grabbed. I'm not saying it's right, but we wouldn't tolerate that in any other work situation. And what do we ask our direct support staff to tolerate in their jobs that would not be acceptable in other work situations? And not saying there's some panacea to this where we can stop it from happening, but there are respectful ways to go about informed consent with staff about this is the challenge in this house. This is the challenge with this person. We want your ideas of how to lessen it, or here are other folks who seem to have found there's again a billion different ways to go about how do we address that, but to know that it happens and to not just say that's just something that happens, but that it's a part of what we need to address. Addressing risk to self. So this could be from putting oneself, like a person we support, putting themselves in a vulnerable position online, out there in the community, etc., or the way they're treating their own body. Um, my specialty tends to do with risk to others, but we see a lot of referrals to us where we're like, we'll take it, we'll screen the person, and because we want to make sure nothing else is going on, and it boils down to the primary thing is risk to self. And so we're trying to develop specific education programs around online risk and financial risk online and selfies and nudity and all these things that we run into and being catfished, tons of things like that. And then risk to the community. Yes, these are the ones that get the headlines, right? So we feel like, oh, that's the most important. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying it's the least frequent when we have somebody who crosses sexual boundaries with other people in the community. So those are high level events that can be considered really high severity, especially depending on the age range of the people that our guy is attracted to. I use guys a lot, gendered there, because out of, I would say it's 96, 97% males that are in our sexual risk program. Females we have in there, definitely we got some concerning situations going on about risk to others, but there's different aspects, different considerations, gender based within that. So there's no one way to manage and mitigate risk, but the first suggestion, which is containment all the time, one to one, arm's distance, no alone time, 10-minute checks. It's not our friend. This is Jim Hoven. So you pronounce that name here, Hoven, Haaven. Jim is one of the originators of sexual risk programs for people with disabilities in the United States, starting in the early 90s. Or no, even back in the 80s, he was running programs out of Oregon. I've had the pleasure of being alongside Jim as he's helped develop our system in New Mexico. This is he always comes back to this. Containment is not our friend. Containment feels good. Nothing bad can happen, right? It's one to one arm's distance. How many times have you had stuff happen when it's one to one arm's distance? What is the burden on staff members to say one to one arm's distance? You ever tried to do it yourself? I, was New York City direct support, and I was told, oh, you got to be one to one. You're arm's distance from this guy. We're going to a Yankees game on the subway. Good luck. There's no way a staff member can keep up that level of vigilance. There's little evidence that containment works long term. In fact, it may cause more problems because people get stressed out when they're contained. It's got a huge cost to it. There's the ethical cost of human rights and containment-based programming. There's the monetary cost of the amount of staff hours. And then people get complacent. Oh, they can't get away with anything. I'm right here. Or they're one to one, nothing. We don't need to pay attention to anything. Oh, they've got one to one staff. The amount of times we've seen things happen in one to one, or we look back at the plan and we're like, that was unachievable. Unachievable. We got four people living in the house, one staff member, and we're saying the plan is for this particular guy, the staff's going to know what he's doing and where he is at all times in the house. How are they possibly supposed to do that? Like when you have to prepare food, get meds ready, take care of other people's hygiene and feeding and eating support needs, and have a break yourself now and then and go to the bathroom yourself. And we get complacent because the plan looks good. In containment, looks good. Plan looks great. It doesn't work in real life. Risk rises. So when we're going to address risk, effective planning for addressing risk to others, we're focused in on this. We've got to screen critical risk factors. You got to know what those are. That would be, we got four big critical risk factors: sexual drive, sexual preoccupation. So, drive is basically how often is the person acting sexually. Preoccupation is how much of their thoughts is it taking up. Um, I'm forgetting the words. Deviance. I'm not a huge fan of that word, but if somebody has quote unquote deviant preferences, we have a fair amount of folks who have seem to be more attracted to underage people, even down to children, or deviance in terms of seem to like the idea of violence and sexuality that are mixed, or other things. So that's a critical risk factor. And then social connectedness. This is key. Social connectedness is a critical risk factor to sexual risk towards others. The more socially connected a person is, the more we're kind of toning down the level of risk they are. People have things to lose. It goes back to the idea of relationship rights. Critical risk factors change over time, that this is a moving target. So, like I said, sexual drive, preoccupation, deviance or seemingly deviant preferences. There's a whole set of literature on counterfeit deviance. That would be a good training, a good topic. Offense management. Oh, I forgot that one. Self-management. How well is the person managing themselves or gaining those skills? And then social connectedness. So that's like the quick and dirty of what is critical when we're looking at sexual risks to others. These four things always pop out. And then there are individual contextual variables: a person's mental health status, their physical status, changes to their personal life, things that for that person kind of can push them around. The tool we use here is the armadillo. There's a link to it you could look up. There's research on it. It's, let's see if I can say what it stands for. Assessment of risk manageability in individuals with developmental or intellectual limitations who offend sexually. That's what armadillo stands for. Danielle.
We had Sabrina talking in the chat box about restraining orders and how those are often utilized right in SILAs and how that can lead to moving of individuals. But Lisa asked a question, what do you do if a residential provider has no other options to move an offender? When an actual event, an actual
Yeah.
SA occurred, and the residential provider is restricted from removing an offender from that location.
So, right, you run into a situation where maybe you have limited beds at your agency, and you've got this situation happen. The offense occurred between housemates. Somebody's got to move. And the bed or beds you have available, you're not going to take the person who just offended and put them in there because the folks over there are vulnerable and we don't want a second victim. And so you're left with no choice, but it's a devil's bargain. Like the person who got offended against has to move. I'm not saying that's not the best option, but sometimes it's the only option. You need to at least acknowledge that that's what's happened and put in the supports in place and the response in place for that person who was victimized to reduce the level of secondary and tertiary trauma that's associated with now having to pick up your life and move and feeling like they did something wrong. That's what we've run into is, what did I do? I didn't do anything and now I have to move. I like who I lived with. I like where I lived. I liked my bedroom. I liked my staff. We need to acknowledge the level of expanding trauma that that causes. What are common errors we see we still make that you may make? This is going to be a quick checklist of things that seem to be typical practice in addressing sexuality that roll into bigger errors. Failure to take contextual factors into account, like a new housemate moves in. That changes everything in a house, right? Risk is person plus environment. The person themselves is not a risk, right? If they lived in a vacuum, risk occurs when the environment does not accommodate or match that person's support need or risk factors. So, new housemates, new residents, bedroom layout changes, new residents, who's in the backyard? Are there parks around? Schools? What's the neighborhood like? Life changes when somebody loses a job, gets a new job, changes relationships, all of those things that can influence stress. Turnover of key staff. We've got a couple plans that say if this house manager leaves, call us. That they are so skilled at their job, know this person so well over such a period of time. We have confidence that risk is lowered because this staff member is there and running that house. If they leave, everything changes. Housemates stay the same, jobs stay the same, residents stay the same, et cetera, stay the same, but we lose one key staff. Sometimes we just had this happen like 2 weeks ago where a guy we hadn't seen in 10 years pops back up. And I thought in my head, I bet it's because Ricky left. And that's exactly what we found out. A staff he'd had for 20 years left, and we saw stuff pop off. What about internal and external destabilizing factors? Mental instability or stability, right? Bipolar stuff or delusions or depression. Major depression is a risk factor for sexual acting out. Medication changes, some reduce libido, some increase libido. If a person goes off SSRIs, their libido may come back or increase. What media has the person consumed, right? What do we see? What are they seeing online that may influence how they think sexuality goes? Other common errors that this is yes or no. Oh, the person's a risk or they're not. No, this is a fluid and continuum type of spectrum situation. It depends where they are, when it is during the course of a day, a week, a month, a year, with whom, what housemates, what staff member, doing what. We could have all the risk in the world, right? Worst place, worst time, worst social environment, but they're with the right staff, risk is low. We can talk about, staff or family as risk factors, right? That we can have a person who is low risk, but it gets high when they're with a certain person. That it is not yes, no. This is we are kayaking down a whitewater, the intersection of person plus environment. Other common errors. It's okay in the bathroom. We're talking about masturbation here. Our recommendation is people masturbate in their bedrooms. That a person has one bedroom, they have many bathrooms. It is one of our common referrals is somebody publicly masturbating or masturbating in public restrooms. We tend to ask teams to redirect to the bathroom. Everyone needs a hug. The person should be allowed to hug. Luck. There are folks where we may work towards it over years, but right now we need to say no. That hugs need to stop because they go sideways. Not side hugs, they go sideways, and all of a sudden the hug won't stop and it's getting a little too much. We're approaching the time of year, staff parties. Tell you what, my phone's going to ring a lot in late December, early January as staff parties occurred and bad stuff happened because everybody thinks somebody else is watching. And all of a sudden, something's happening in the bathroom. Staff parties are notorious in our world for like, oh crap, how'd that happen? Church, somebody go to church. Yeah, absolutely, go to church. But people overtrust at church, and we need to know that there are safeguards in place for some of the folks we support. Oh, I know why he's staring. He's really into kids. We don't know that. We don't know that. Like staring gets overinterpreted. Family knows best. Sometimes family causes problems. On both ends of the spectrum, too many rights restrictions, too little rights restrictions when somebody is visiting. Sexuality is just another behavior. No, it's not. If you want to see the whole system get set off, add sexuality to the mix. Oh, we've got to step in immediately. Can't let him do anything. No, sometimes we need to see how things are going to progress. We see this with staring. Oh, we get in between them. Stop the staring. We need to know who and how long it's going to last, and do they self-manage? All of these little subtleties about how we go about gathering data over time. Oh, we can't do sanctions. We have no sanctions, no, human rights stuff violations. Yeah, I know in our system we start at human rights. We assume same rights, but when we need to, we do recommend and put in place restrictions. Certain places, certain activities, internet, etc., with constant rehashing of human rights reviews. We should keep it to ourselves. It's private. Let's not talk about it. No, sunshine is the best disinfectant. We need to speak about these issues, which makes me so happy that we're continuing to have these conversations. And then what about victims advocacy when the victim is not with your agency? Well, HIPAA, we get that. I'm like, the cure for HIPAA is release of information. Get a signature because we need to talk to somebody. Just because somebody's not with your agency doesn't mean your responsibility stops. Oh, everything's been fine over the last year. We don't need to talk about this anymore. Yeah, we need to know why everything's been fine. We need to know, is it supports dependency or is he gaining skills? And how do we keep this train rolling? How do we keep moving forward? So what are best practice systems that are rare? We're still building ours. It's a constant rebuilding process. Proactive, not reactive, that we start having conversations before something happens. And I know some of you are like, well, it's too late. It's never too late for the next one. Participation and honesty by all stakeholders, especially folks who disagree. I know in comments, I'm sure I'm going to see, what about guardians? What about family members? What about people who disagree? What about people who don't think they have sexual rights? We need participation, honesty. We need to build the system from what we have, not what we wish we had. Individualized screening and planning. Not all risk is built the same. Using a structured tool. That's where, like, how do we do this? Like every system's different, that we need to have a repeatable, reliable, valid way of looking at risk. It's replicable, it's sustainable. That we update our information regularly, that recommendations don't stay the same over time, that we're not acting as if what happened 10 years ago just happened yesterday, that we have a longitudinal perspective on this, that one of the benefits of our work and disabilities is we have time to take our time, and we also have a long time with people that we should develop over time. We update. Drive our decisions by evidence, not assumptions. There's so many assumptions in sexuality. We need to know what is actually happening, what is on the ground, and that we have multi-tiered clinical perspectives, that no one person can do this, that is a one-legged stool, that we have folks who provide consultation and feedback and say, I think you got your head up your butt right now. I definitely have had that said to me, and I'm like, no, I don't. And then I think about it, I'm like, I kind of did. The best supervision is from folks who sometimes maybe challenge themselves to disagree with you, to provide different options, multiple tiered, and that we have accountability, that when things go wrong, there's a process to look at it. When things go right, why did they go right? That are we like, is there a so what to this? We've done all of it, but so what? Are we seeing improvements and reductions in supervision, reductions in restrictions? Are we seeing improvements in self-management? Are we seeing staff members that are saying they feel like they're gaining skills? Because those roles are irreplaceable. Staff and family supports are irreplaceable in the algebra of rights and risk. Person plus environment. Our first environment is those who are around us and their attitudes. As we see here, this visual, and I can send this to anybody who wants it, but please just give credit, right? Like, I've seen it used in places where I'm like, I don't think you had permission to do that. So this is years of work. Interviewed a ton of direct support staff, and their um, common statements, and these are folks who worked with folks with sexually challenging behavior, where they felt between all the time, having to sit between rights and risk, between safety and empowerment, between what is appropriate, inappropriate, all their different roles. Between work and home, how do you take this work home with you? Sometimes getting physically between people, having to get in between the individual and the community, or between the person with they support and the team, right? Feeling in between that. Sometimes feeling powerful, sometimes feeling powerless. There's a whole series of work on this, but what kept them in the job is the relationships and seeing the change in the people they support. So we need to support our direct support professionals and our family members if we're going to address risk and understand that relationships and feeling like you are part of a story of change is what keeps them going. From the folks, and I've talked about this around the country and talked to direct support staff who are like, oh my God, that's the job. And this is what the job felt like to me as well when I was doing DSP. All these things, I got to stay focused on this person and helping them change and having a relationship. So, what are you going to do to commit to begin to better address sexual risk situations while supporting staff and families? One little thing. It starts with one. There's so many. I know it's overwhelming. You're like, I need to go back to that slide. What were the parts of the system? This is the umbrella. This is the introduction. We can have more specific talks or find other folks. I see there's tons of folks out there doing talks. It's not just me, but continue to have these talks about addressing sexual risk situations. It is the cornerstone of how we move forward progressively in our systems. If we don't do this, we can't do anything. Name of the training. If we can talk about this, we can talk about anything. This is a doorway to, if we can deal with this, we can deal with other stuff. So, how do we make these decisions? This is the quick and dirty because none of this can be one person. None of it can be done like that. None of it should be done quickly. So, how do we make decisions about risk and care? Over here, I've got the ship's log, right? So, we're picturing ourselves sailing the seven seas. You're getting on a boat that you don't know where it goes. You've got this rough map that maybe I just filled in a little bit of parts of, but you don't know what lies out there on the open ocean of risk and care. What about the next person? What about this big wave? What about this part of the system? So we need to document. You keep a ship's log so you know how you got to that land. You know how this one went. What are we documenting? We're documenting our consideration. What did we think about? What were we considering during this process? That we've taken our time to consider and we do it in a calm way. We keep our cool. You don't need a captain of the ship who's screaming and ranting and raving and running around saying we're all going to die. That we chill out and we know that we've gotten this far. How do we get a little bit farther? We need to be cool. This is going to bring out all sorts of emotions. Sometimes it's consultation. Who can I call about this? Like, make sure that I'm not, deluding myself into what I'm thinking right now, that I checks and balances of my own thinking. It also spreads liability. Oh, those came up at the same time. That we compromise. There's not a perfect answer to any of this. It's somewhere in between. Staff members, family members may want it like this, and I know it needs to be like this. Where are we in between? And how do we collaborate to get to those places? How do we have these tough conversations? How do we say, can we move a little bit? That first grain of sand is the important one. It means the process has started. That we can get somewhere with through collaboration that's calm and we are considering things and consulting, that we can come to consensus about this. Even in the most difficult situations I've been in, we have come to consensus. And we do it through an informed consent process. That here are the risks, here's what we're talking about, both with the person we're supporting and the teams or family members. An ongoing, self-feeding, informed consent process. This is like an old quote from our Department of Health, which always sits with me. No action without information. Meaning, you're not like, oh, let's just go do it right now, right? Or let's contain this person right now, or let's change this right now. We need information first. But once we have that information, no information without action. Once you have the information, which you do now somewhat about risk, rights, responsibility, sexuality, you got to take some action. That key foundational question I've been asking, what next? What do you commit to do? Even if it's something small, even if it's with just one person, it's that next grain of sand in the hourglass. So let's keep talking about this or talk about it in, find the other folks talking about this as well. I'm not the only one out there. I'm happy to keep doing it. But send your ideas in, or we can talk about some. We got about 5 minutes left for what can be covered in session two, session three of this topic. Oops, that's the end of slideshow.
Jason, we did have one question that came through when you were talking about making the recommendation for, masturbation being done in a person's room. And Kelly had brought up the question of what happens when there's roommates involved, right? Because there are some Scylla homes that have two people to a room versus just a private room.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing, right? Where it was like, if we're telling somebody to do it in private, do they actually have privacy, right? Or are we telling them to do the impossible? Um, I mean, I think that's an individual situation. Our go-to is bedroom is best because that's a singular location. In that type of situation, I'd need to know more about the person, their ability, how well do they generalize, or how easily might they generalize, right? Like, oh, you're saying bathroom, therefore every bathroom. Or do we have the ability to understand their comprehension of, oh, it's this bathroom, right? And only this one. That would be the questions I would go to of that individual situation.
I am not seeing any other questions coming through. Um, Just great information that was presented today. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. And I do have a couple from way back at the beginning of the presentation. There was a couple people that had sent through a couple of ideas, so I'll send those to you so that you're aware. But I am not seeing anything else. Um,
All right. I do see people asking for copies of it. I'm happy to do that. My email is you go through ICPN and they can get with me. But here is mine in the chat. Talkaboutinc@gmail.com. Talkaboutinc. Yeah, that 2 hours did go by fast, Pam. I was getting pressured at the end. I kept thinking I was going to run out of things, and then I was like, oh, dang it! Now I got to rush through parts I didn't want to rush through. So yeah, I'm happy to come back. I love working with ICPN over the years. It's been just a really great relationship of folks. I hope we're all doing good stuff out there. Um, so yeah, hit me up. I will answer as much as I can, and let's do more of this. Thank you so much. Thanks for
absolutely.
taking time out of your day to talk about this.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you
Thanks, Emma.
for partnering with us again.
Yep, anytime.
And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Oh, we got people raising hands. I don't know what that means.
Could just be
Oh,
accident.
CEUs, yeah, that's like Danielle said at the beginning, that takes a few days to figure out
Yep,
anything
you'll
else.
get an email within 24 hours. You have to fill out the survey attached to the email. There's a link within the email. And then once that is completed, your certificate is automated. It's automatically generated to that same email address. All
Excellent. All
right.
right, we're hitting noon here in Mountain Time, 1 p.m. Central, right? You guys are Central? Yeah. Um,
Yes.
cool.
All right.
Go do good things. Let's make ourselves better. See you later.
Absolutely. Bye.